Oak Ridge Meadows Promise Sanctuary. Nestled behind stone walls and wrought iron gates, it boasted manicured lawns, a private clubhouse, and a security patrol that never slept. For the residents, it was a dream wrapped in brick and stucco. For me, it was supposed to be a clean slate. I moved in with high hopes. My name is Lucas Hale, 34, founder of a niche AI platform that got acquired for 8 figures. I had no wife, no kids, just a hunger for quiet and control. The Lamborghini Aventador I parked in my driveway wasn't just a car. It was the culmination of years of sleepless nights and risk. Jet black with crimson accents, it turned heads and whispered power. But in Oak Ridge, power didn't belong to the man with the fastest car. It belonged to the woman with the biggest clipboard. Karen Whitmore ran the Homeowners Association like a duchess guarding her court. Mid-50s, with a permanently raised eyebrow and lipstick that could cut glass, Karen wielded the rulebook like a sword. She lived 2 houses down with her neurotic poodle, Chardonnay, and her teenage son, Bryce. My first encounter with Karen was deceptively polite. She brought over a welcome packet and an armful of cookies she didn't bake. "We do things a certain way here," she said, her tone sweet but edged with warning. "I'm sure you'll fit in if you respect the rules." I nodded, smiled, thanked her for the cookies, then forgot all about her. That was my mistake. A week later, I received my first violation: excessive glare from vehicle paint interfering with community harmony. The fine? $75. I laughed. Until the next one came: awning material not compliant with community standards. Another $150. I had used the exact shade of earth tone listed in their bylaws. Still, she fined me. At the next HOA meeting, I spoke up. "Are these violations arbitrary? Or is there a process?" Karen didn't appreciate the question. "The board reserves the right to maintain visual integrity. You agreed when you moved in." The board, of course, was her and 3 other retirees who owed her favors. I realized then that Oak Ridge wasn't a neighborhood. It was her kingdom. Still, I played along, at first. I paid the fines, repainted the awning, and even installed non-reflective window tints. But the citations kept coming. One neighbor confided in me over the fence. "She never liked young people with money. Says we bring in the wrong energy." Another told me Karen once fined a family for having an inflatable unicorn pool toy visible from the street. Visual disruption, she called it. I stopped attending meetings. Karen escalated. She filed noise complaints for phantom music. I started getting anonymous letters about my car being a hazard to children. And then, the most absurd yet, a demand to garage the Lamborghini because it was too provocative for the neighborhood. I appealed. The board denied it. So I started digging. Using public records, I found that Karen had been HOA president for 8 years. In that time, 5 families had moved out under stress from fines or legal threats. Most were younger professionals. Her son, Bryce, had a reputation too, suspended from school twice, rumored to have crashed a golf cart into the tennis fence during a party. Still, he strutted around the neighborhood like royalty. He was tall, tanned, with the lazy grin of someone who'd never faced consequences. I kept to myself after that, waiting her out. Then, on a sleepy Sunday afternoon, everything changed. It began with a chime on my phone. Ring motion alert. I glanced at the video feed. There he was. Bryce. He sauntered into my driveway, eyes flicking around, hands deep in his hoodie. I tapped to zoom. He pulled something from his pocket, a key. My key. My blood went cold. I bolted from my desk, shouting as I ran. Too late. The Lambo roared to life. Bryce revved the engine with a manic grin, threw it into gear, and burned rubber down the street. I stood frozen, breathless, as the echo of horsepower faded into the horizon. That sound, the shriek of tires, the primal growl of the engine, was the sound of betrayal. Karen's son had stolen my car, and I had no idea how he got the key. I called the police immediately. My voice trembled as I recited the license plate, make, and model. They promised to dispatch a unit. 25 minutes later, the call came. The car had been found, or what was left of it, totaled. Bryce had taken a turn too fast on Crestline Drive and plowed into a granite retaining wall. The car was a mangled sculpture of carbon fiber and despair. Miraculously, he survived with just a fractured collarbone. I drove to the scene, heart pounding. The flashing lights, the flurry of EMTs, the twisted wreck, it all blurred together. Karen stood by the ambulance, arm around her injured son. When she saw me, her expression twisted. "How dare you," she shouted. "Giving a teenager access to such a machine? That's negligence." My jaw dropped. "He stole it. How did he get the key?" "I never gave him permission." "Don't play innocent, Lucas," she snapped. "The HOA will be hearing about this. You endangered a minor." A paramedic tried to calm her, but she pulled away. Later that evening, I received an official notice from the HOA. They were filing a lien against my property. Damages included community landscaping, a new retaining wall, and emergency cleanup. Total, $37,200. The justification? I had violated a clause in the HOA charter, one I had overlooked, that held residents responsible for incidents involving community minors on their property. According to Karen, Bryce had believed he had implied consent to use the vehicle. And suddenly I was the villain. But something didn't add up. How did he get the key? I checked my security footage. 3 days before the theft, the system recorded brief motion in my garage. A figure had entered during a 10-minute blackout when I was out running errands. The footage was blurry, but the shape, the walk, the dog leash dangling from one hand. It was Karen. She had taken the spare key. That night, I sat in the dark, the smoldering remains of my Lamborghini flashing across my mind like a nightmare on repeat. Karen thought she had won, that her rules, her power, her lies would bury me. She was wrong. The game had changed, and I was no longer playing by her rules. By Monday morning, the story had spread like wildfire. Oak Ridge Meadows was buzzing with speculation. Some whispered sympathy, others murmured disbelief. Most, however, avoided eye contact as if my misfortune were contagious. I could see it in their glances. They were terrified of crossing Karen. I wasn't. The wreckage of my Aventador was still being assessed when I marched into the precinct to file a full police report. Bryce Whitmore was 17, legally a minor, but that didn't make what he did any less criminal. I presented the ring footage, a copy of the car title, and photographs of the garage where the spare key had been stored, now conspicuously missing. The detective, Officer Ramirez, leaned back in her chair. "This is compelling, Mr. Hale. But minors, especially those with affluent guardians, are often shielded from the full brunt of the law." I knew what she meant. Karen's influence stretched beyond the HOA. Her late husband had been a city councilman. Her name was on donation plaques across the district. But I wasn't looking for favors. I was looking for justice. That afternoon, I returned home to find a certified letter from the HOA taped to my door. It read like a court summons. The board had scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss the repercussions of a vehicular incident involving community property and a resident minor. I expected a hearing. What I got was a lynching. The boardroom in the clubhouse was a bland, beige nightmare of water-stained ceiling tiles and dusty flags. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by her loyalists, Mr. Bixley, the retired accountant who audited HOA dues with religious fervor, and Ms. Palmer, a former elementary school principal who seemed to believe that dissent should be punished with detention. I stood alone across from them, the accused. Karen cleared her throat with theatrical gravitas. "Mr. Hale, we're here to address your gross negligence in allowing a minor access to a dangerous vehicle. As outlined in Article 7, Clause 3 of the HOA Charter, any harm involving underage residents and private property may result in a community-enforced penalty." I held up the ring footage. "He stole the key. I didn't give him permission. This isn't negligence, it's theft." Karen's lips curled. Intent is hard to prove, especially with your pattern of community violations. One could argue you created an unsafe environment. That's when she unveiled the invoice. Retaining wall repair, $18,000. Oil and fuel cleanup, $9,700. Landscaping replacement, $6,500. Administrative fees, $3,000. Total, $37,200. Payable within 30 days, or a lien would be placed on my property. It was a slap in the face, but not a surprise. Karen was leveraging the system, twisting every bylaw, and positioning herself as the protector of community order. I turned to the audience of residents. Some looked away. Others, like Ms. Khan and the Rodriguezes, gave me subtle nods of support. But none dared speak. That night, I did what I should have done months earlier. I read every word of the HOA charter. It was dense, verbose, and riddled with contradictions. But buried in Appendix D was something that sparked hope, a clause about financial oversight. Any community expense exceeding $25,000 had to be approved by a full quorum vote. Karen hadn't held a vote. She had issued the repair orders herself. The next morning, I hired a lawyer. Maya Delgado specialized in HOA litigation. Sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, she took one look at the paperwork and said, "This is war. And you have a case." She filed a motion to contest the lien, citing fraud and abuse of power. She also requested a subpoena for HOA financial records. The board responded with silence. So Maya escalated. She filed a discovery request for all expenditures tied to Karen in the last 3 years. If we could prove a pattern of misuse, it wouldn't just nullify the lien, it would expose Karen as a fraud. Meanwhile, I started talking to neighbors. One by one, stories emerged. The Fosters had paid $2,000 in fines for an unapproved bench swing. The Lees were forced to repaint their home twice due to shade inconsistencies. The Dillons, who eventually moved out, had been threatened with legal action over a flagpole. All the while, Karen's projects bloomed. A $25,000 community gazebo that no one used, a $12,000 dog park renovation complete with wine barrel planters, and a $6,000 security camera upgrade installed by her cousin's company. The residents were angry, but fear kept them silent. Until one brave voice cracked the dam. It was Mr. Carlisle, the oldest resident on the street. He spoke up during the next HOA meeting. "I've lived here since the community was built," he said, standing on unsteady legs. "And I've never seen the board this corrupt. I saw Karen enter Mr. Hale's garage the week before the accident. No permission. No explanation." Karen went pale. I stepped forward. "I have security footage. The timestamp matches his testimony. You entered my home without consent and removed my property. That makes you complicit." Gasps echoed around the room. Karen tried to recover. "This is character assassination. This man has been undermining our harmony since day one." But the tide had turned. Ms. Khan stood up. Then the Rodriguezes. Then Mrs. Anwar. Each with their own stories, their own grievances. The vote to suspend Karen passed 18-2. Bryce, no longer cloaked in his mother's shadow, faced his own consequences. The police finally pressed charges for grand theft auto and reckless endangerment. His school issued a disciplinary hearing. Karen's influence was crumbling. As the meeting adjourned, Maya leaned over to me and whispered, "This isn't the end, but it's the beginning of the end for her." Outside, the air was crisp with the scent of cut grass and a storm brewing far in the distance. I looked across the cul-de-sac at Karen's house, once pristine, now just another facade waiting to fall. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Because now, the truth had traction. And I wasn't alone anymore. In the weeks that followed the emergency HOA meeting, the landscape of Oak Ridge Meadows began to shift. For the first time in nearly a decade, Karen Whitmore was no longer president. But that didn't mean she had vanished. No, she merely retreated. Retreated, but not surrendered. Her absence was eerie. The newsletter stopped arriving. The community bulletin board went blank. Chardonnay, her ever-present poodle, no longer yapped from her porch. Her white Lexus remained in the driveway, but the woman herself had gone silent. It was the kind of silence that warns of an incoming storm. Then came the retaliation. It began subtly. My mailbox was tipped over. Once. Then twice. Trash cans overturned in the night. Harmless, almost juvenile, but undeniably targeted. My garage camera caught shadows moving just beyond the frame, never distinct enough to identify. Maya, my attorney, advised caution. We're making progress. They'll want to provoke you into reacting irrationally. She wasn't wrong. Because Karen, stripped of her official power, had become something more dangerous, an agent of chaos with nothing to lose. The HOA board, now led by Ms. Khan, tried to enforce a semblance of order. They canceled the lien on my property and officially cleared my name. But that was only the surface. Underneath, Karen was still working her network. One afternoon, I received a call from my insurance provider. A fraud alert. Someone had filed a supplemental claim using my policy number for personal injury. The claimant? Bryce Whitmore. He says he suffered emotional trauma from the incident, the agent explained. He's asking for $50,000 in psychological damages. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I forwarded everything to Maya. They're desperate, she said. Let them hang themselves with paperwork. The courts don't take kindly to abusive process. But Karen had more moves. One night, I was driving back from a late dinner downtown when I noticed a car tailing me. Not close enough to alarm, but consistent. Every turn I made, it followed. When I pulled into my driveway, the headlights paused at the corner, then sped off. The next morning, the side of my house was spray-painted in red. Predator. That was the breaking point. I installed floodlights, motion sensors, hired private security to patrol nightly. And I went to the police again, this time with a folder of evidence. Officer Ramirez listened, jaw tight. We don't have enough for an arrest. But if anything escalates, even slightly, you call us. Immediately. I didn't want to wait for escalation. Instead, I escalated first. With Maya's help, we filed a civil suit against both Karen and Bryce. Charges: unlawful entry, theft, defamation, harassment, and financial sabotage. We named the HOA in the suit, but carved out exemptions for the current board members who had since supported the internal investigation. And then we filed an injunction to freeze Karen's access to community funds. That got their attention. Suddenly, more neighbors stepped forward with stories. Mr. Lee, who had overpaid HOA dues due to a clerical error. Mrs. Alvarez, whose backyard remodel was mysteriously delayed until she donated to the clubhouse maintenance fund. Karen's pattern of misappropriation wasn't just malicious, it was illegal. A full financial audit was launched. What it uncovered was worse than anyone expected. Tens of thousands in undocumented expenses. Payments to shell companies tied to Karen's cousin. HOA checks issued with no clear work performed. And in one chilling case, a $10,000 expenditure marked legal retaliation contingency. The board was stunned. The community, livid. But Karen didn't crumble.
No.
She held a press conference. She stood in front of her home, flanked by 2 lawyers and Bryce, arm in a sling again for effect. Cameras clicked as she wept for the cameras. I have served this community for years, she said, voice trembling. And now I'm being attacked for trying to keep it safe. This campaign of hate, led by one man, is poisoning everything we built. She pointed at me directly. He brought danger into our streets. He targeted my family. And he wants to ruin me for it. The news outlets aired it without context. The backlash online was swift. I received hundreds of anonymous comments, some defending her, others attacking both of us. But I knew the truth was on our side. And then, finally, it arrived. The court date. Superior Court, Hall B. The courtroom buzzed with tension. On one side, Karen, stone-faced, in a navy blazer and pearls. On the other, me, Maya, and a binder full of receipts, statements, and testimonies. Maya opened with precision. She laid out the timeline.
The theft.
The false charges. The abuse of HOA authority. The retaliatory vandalism. And then the financial discrepancies. Karen's defense wobbled from the beginning. Her lawyer tried to paint me as an aggressive outsider. A man who came in, flaunted wealth, and disrespected tradition. But the evidence didn't lie. The footage, the emails, The forged signatures. Even a whistleblower from Karen's cousin's business had stepped forward. After 3 days of arguments, the judge made his ruling. Karen was found liable for harassment, unauthorized entry, and embezzlement. Bryce was ordered to undergo community service and juvenile rehabilitation. The HOA was cleared under its new leadership, but was placed under probationary oversight. Karen was fined, heavily, and she was stripped of all rights related to Oak Ridge governance. As the gavel dropped, Maya turned to me and whispered, "Checkmate." Karen didn't make eye contact as she left the courtroom. Bryce followed, head down. Outside, the sun was setting over Oak Ridge Meadows. It cast long, golden shadows over freshly trimmed lawns and tidy hedges. Justice, long overdue, had finally arrived. But the story wasn't over. Because justice is one thing, revenge is another. And I still had one card left to play. Spring arrived with crisp mornings and lavender sunsets. Oak Ridge Meadows was quieter now. The chaos had settled like dust after a storm, and while the surface looked pristine, the foundations had shifted forever. Karen Whitmore's house went on the market. The listing was sterile, charming 4-bedroom with luxury updates and tranquil views. No mention of the HOA scandal. No sign of the shattered legacy within those walls. Just a motivated seller trying to disappear. Bryce was no longer seen at the local high school. Word was he'd been transferred to a private rehab school 2 towns over. His social media was silent. A ghost, like his mother. But I wasn't ready to forget. Because while justice had its moment in court, revenge was still mine to serve, and I knew just how to deliver it. Maya thought I was finished. She had even joked about starting a podcast to document the absurdity of HOA law. "Lucas," she said one afternoon, "you've won. You don't need to keep picking at the wound." "I'm not picking," I said. "I'm disinfecting." You see, in the aftermath of the trial, the audit had uncovered more than just shady invoices. There were emails, messages Karen thought had been deleted, communications between her and her cousin, the contractor, discussing how to fabricate bids for community improvement projects. One in particular caught my eye. A forwarded quote for $80,000 to update irrigation systems with a note. "Let's add 20% for our trouble. HOA will never check." That alone would be enough to press for a criminal investigation. But I wasn't interested in legal paperwork. I wanted something poetic. Something permanent. So I made a call. To a friend. A YouTuber. His channel specialized in neighborhood drama, overzealous HOA boards, bizarre neighbor disputes, backyard wars. Millions of subscribers. And he owed me a favor. I sent him everything. The footage. The emails. The audio snippets. Photos of the crash. The spray paint. Even clips from the HOA meeting. He went live with the story a week later. A full documentary expose. HOA tyrant tries to frame neighbor after her son steals Lamborghini. It went viral. In 2 days, the video had 5 million views. By the end of the week, it trended nationally. Karen's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Reporters reached out. Talk shows requested interviews. Reddit exploded with memes. People made TikToks reenacting the courtroom drama. One girl dressed up as Karen, clutching a fake poodle and shouting HOA bylaws into a megaphone. Karen became a caricature, a cautionary tale of power abused and ego run amok. The day after the video hit its peak, her house was vandalized. Ironically, I had nothing to do with it. Someone painted #JusticeForLimbo across her garage in neon yellow. She took the house off the market the next morning. The final blow came when the city launched a formal investigation into her misuse of nonprofit and community funds. Her cousin's company was blacklisted from local contracts. Karen's face, once plastered across civic events and donation drives, vanished from the public eye. Meanwhile, Oak Ridge Meadows began to heal. Ms. Khan organized volunteer cleanup days. The Rodriguezes held the first community potluck in years. The new HOA charter, rewritten with public input, eliminated arbitrary fines and added transparency clauses. I even installed a modest little fountain in my front yard. No one complained. Then one evening, as I watered my newly planted tulips, a car pulled into my driveway. A woman stepped out, early 40s, sharp cheekbones, hesitant smile. "Lucas Hale?" she asked. "That's me." She extended a hand. "Detective Andrea Shaw, Internal Fraud Division. Mind if I ask you a few questions about Karen Whitmore?" I smirked. "Not at all." We sat on my porch as the sun dipped low. She asked about the forged bids, the unreported transactions, the missing dues from years prior. And then she asked something else. "Did you ever notice any threats made toward other residents? Not just vandalism, but intimidation, coercion." I told her everything. Not just what Karen did to me, but what she did to the Dillons. The Fosters. The families who left rather than fight. She nodded, scribbled notes, and stood. "I think you'll be hearing from us again soon. We're building a case, not just HOA misconduct. We're talking organized fraud." As she drove away, I looked across the street at Karen's house. The windows were dark. Curtains drawn. No movement. But the walls, once symbols of control and supremacy, now felt hollow. Like the echo of a tyrant too proud to surrender, too guilty to face the truth. Weeks later, the news broke. Karen Whitmore was arrested on charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and tax evasion. Her assets frozen. Her name stricken from every board she once chaired. And Bryce? He posted a public apology video. Tearful. Rehearsed. He blamed his behavior on stress, peer pressure, the burden of expectation. I didn't believe a word, but it didn't matter. His apology wasn't for me. It was for the internet. In the end, I didn't gloat. I didn't post about it. I didn't even celebrate. I sat on my porch, glass of wine in hand, and watched the kids play down the block, free of fear and scrutiny. That was enough. Karen once told me that Oak Ridge was a community of rules. She was wrong. It's a community of people. And people, when pushed far enough, fight back.